honestly, the internet imploding.
Nonsequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated. Non-sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated. Non-sequitur.
Well, I am finally happy that we are going to have a episode and a show based on something other than what it was just based on. If you are coming along from the last show that we did about 15 minutes ago, thank you for sticking through. We promise that this one will be much smoother sailing, and I think this is going to be a great discussion, actually. Everybody that you see here on the screen has been here before, some of them many times, but we'll go through and let them introduce themselves for those of you who are seeing them for the first time. Let's start with Suris, since you're right in between Steve and I.
Well, as strangely sexual as that already sounds, my name is Suris. I have a channel called Suris the Skeptic. I have a couple series on there. I have my Hammered Out podcast, which is a podcast where Ocean is my co-host on there. So debating against him here is going to feel just a little awkward, but it's not like that's how we met or anything. I also have the Dangers of Woo series, which is a pseudoscience debunking series. And I also have the LHAC series, which is breaking down certain concepts in philosophy, like Clipper's Principle, different issues with certain arguments. And then I've also got video responses, because apparently if I don't have those, my skeptic card gets revoked.
Excellent. All right, let's go to the coordinator of tonight's events, and you'll be hearing from him in just a second when we get done with introductions. But James, welcome.
Thank you so much. Stoked to be here. And for one thing, you guys, I want to say thank you to Kyle and Steve, because they have worked so hard to make this possible. And in addition, subscribe to their channel. If I can tell you, I'll vouch. I fell in love with the channel over the summer. I commented on a video and I said, hey, that's what I'm talking about. Kyle's like, hey, man, what's up? The point is, totally want you to subscribe. If you're a Christian, hey, they've got Christians on here. They've got atheists, and they've got all the strange creatures in between. So highly encourage it. And yeah, I'm at Modern Day Debate. Stoked to be doing this tonight. And thanks for having me.
Strange creatures is perhaps the perfect way to sum up some of the the people that we have on here.
Some of the people here.
Yeah, no, not on here. Everybody here is absolutely normal. And if you, like I said, if you watch the last show, that'll make sense. But everybody here is fantastic.
Kyle, you're referring to me as normal?
Yes, oddly enough, I am.
I take offense to that.
Or I guess compared to some of the other people on this channel, maybe I am normal. Hi, I'm Ocean. Also go by Ocean the Wizard on Twitter, and have been the resident polytheist around the Great Debate community. You can see me popping in and out of Steve's channel, and I'm also on Hammered Out with Suris. And I am a Germanic polytheist, which means, yes, I actually believe in Thor. And I'm happy to have discussions around it, especially philosophical discussions about polytheism. It's just a fun topic for me, and happy to be here.
Praise Odin. And then to his left is Mike Winger. Mike Winger has been on this channel before, I believe, is one time, correct, Mike, with Apologia.
Yeah, just once.
That's right. Welcome back, sir.
Yeah. So my name's Mike Winger. I have a channel on YouTube by that name. My name, Mike Winger, and I do explaining and defending the Christian worldview. So teaching the Bible, doing theology, and then also the defense of the scriptures, the defense of the Christian worldview, apologetics, that sort of thing. And I put out usually 2 videos a week, and I like engaging with skeptics and their arguments and their reasoning as well, and trying to outreach to those who are in, diametric opposition to the Christian worldview. So, yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right, sweet. Absolutely. Thanks for coming along. James, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can kind of explain how tonight's going to be different than what people are probably used to. In terms of videos, it's going to split into 2 parts, and James is going to introduce the topic for tonight and how that's going to work.
Definitely. So for the format, it's true. What we will do is for the first half, we are here at Nonsequitur. And at that point, once we make it to the halfway mark, we're going to I'm going to put a link in the comments, and we'll go to modern day debate. We're going to have a slight subject change. So it's going to be, we'll clean up on any last points from this debate, if there are any. Otherwise, it'll be about the alleged distinctiveness of Christianity, whether or not it has meaningful differences from other religions, or maybe not. Maybe there are arbitrary differences, that kind of thing. So for the first part, though, I'm stoked. This is going to be probably one of the more interesting conversations that I'm going to hear in a long time. It's basically atheism, theism, and polytheism together, answering the questions of life, such as what gives humans value, or where does morality have its foundations within each of these 3 respective worldviews, or eternal destination? How would these 3 different gentlemen account for those answers for those questions? So very excited to be here.
Okay, and I guess we can now that introductions have been made and everybody knows what's going to go on, we can dive right in. So James, how do you want to throw the first question out there, or get the topic rolling?
Yeah, definitely.
He who throws the first stone.
So for the first subject, we'll start with morality. Just really interested to hear all 3 of your perspectives on the foundations for ethics in your worldview, at least from your own personal perspective.
Sure
and
thing.
Why don't we? Thank you.
I was gonna go ahead and start since nobody was raising their hand. So for morality, my personal moral leanings are to moral anti-realism. I don't see a reason for there to be a ultimately objective morality, though I am fine with there being objective morality in a bit of a less ultimate sense. As far as societal morality goes, I typically think that consequentialism works decently well. Past that, I think that's probably the short and sweet of it for me.
Ocean?
You're muted.
I think your
Ocean.
mic's muted, Ocean.
That's his morality right there for you.
Oh,
All right, Mike Winger.
I was muting
There's no
myself to
position on morality.
stop thing. But okay, so anyway, I'm a little bit more agnostic on like where morality might be grounded, whether or not it's real. I used to be a moral anti-realist, but as of late, I've come more to the position that there's a possibility of an objective morality. And as far as how that affects polytheism, it could be grounded in a god, it could be grounded in the gods, it could be grounded completely external to the gods. It's not something that necessarily affects the worldview construction. So, you know, from there, I think that morality is more of an interesting mystery to me. There's intuitions that we have about it, and I think that it's definitely worth exploring. But as of now, there's some readings that I want to do to explore more into that topic, but I haven't actually come to a decision myself yet as far as where I stand on it. Especially after abandoning a position beforehand. I used to hold a position, but I've since left that position.
Okay. Mike?
Well, you won't be surprised to hear my position, but I want to say this before I start. For those who, in their heads, are already predicting everything they think I think and will say, I just ask you to slow down and let me express my own views. I'm talking not to you guys in the room here, but the people watching. just to allow this Christian worldview to be something maybe more robust than what you may have heard about in Sunday school, or maybe what you remember from your encounters with certain people. So my view would be this, and I'm not a philosopher, but I do try to think about these things, is that morality is a genuine thing, and that moral values are real, and moral obligations are also legitimate and real. So that means, like, in other words, it really is wrong to torture a baby for fun. It's wrong whether anyone else agrees about it. It's wrong whether or not anybody, thinks along those lines or not. It just doesn't matter. It's definitely a morally wrong thing in a very true and full sense of the word, not a preference like ice cream. Yeah, and I ground that. Now, that's an observation of reality. I ground that in God. I say, well, God explains this moral realism. So I'm not arguing from God to morals. I'm arguing from morals to God.
So any issues for all three of you, one for the other, and with regard to your guys' ethical systems, things that you might think, hey, isn't this maybe a potential problem for your worldview with regard to ethics?
Well, I mean, I'm the only one actually taking a position that morals are real. I would just want to say, you can come at me with any concerns or thoughts on that. But I would say this, is that a lot of the problems that may be raised by either Ocean or by Suris on this issue of Christianity and why they may not believe it will actually relate to the issue of morality. And it will seem strange to say, on one hand, one person says, I think morals aren't real. On the other hand, I'm not sure if they're real or not, yet I'm going to use my moral standards as a reason to disprove your religion. That seems a little strange to me.
Well, I don't think any of us are going to try. I don't think any of us are walking into this as a method to disprove a religion. So, personally, I have no reason to disprove Christianity, especially not here in this debate. I have no reason to disprove polytheism, especially not here in this debate. So I'm not going, if I were to take any umbrage with your stance, it would not be on the position of attempting to undermine your religion. Strictly, undermine it as in disprove it. So that's not a thing that I would be doing. Also, I don't think that there's an issue with taking a non-position if you honestly can't claim any knowledge on it. I take a moral anti-realist position, not because I can claim knowledge, but because I can't. It also means that I can take the position that I don't think you can either. It doesn't necessarily mean that my position not being as grounded in something that you ground yours in a deity, and you view that as a very, very strong grounding. The fact that I don't ground mine in a deity does not necessarily mean that my position is any weaker, as far as I'm concerned.
I would mostly agree with Suris. I think that for me, like I'm kind of holding a non-position here, so I don't want to press it as far too hard. But at the same time, as far as the grounding is concerned with Christianity, I think that Christianity falls victim to the Euthyphro dilemma. As far as where, if you're going to be grounding morality in God, then it's hard for me to understand how goodness is defined. Is it something that is external to God? Does God command things because they are good, or does God command things and then therefore they are good? And if the answer to that is, well, goodness is vested or in God somehow, that he simply is good, then what defines that? Is it God that defines that he's good, or is it something else? And then you can kick the can further and further down, and you still wind up with the same question. And I think that dilemma applies to, you can turn that around and apply that to a polytheistic view as well. But with polytheism, the grounding of it doesn't necessarily matter as much, because we don't have a hell and a justice structure with polytheism as much, which would be, I think that would probably have to do with a later discussion.
Okay, so we had two different worldview responses there, so I'm not sure what to respond to. But if I can maybe ask Ocean first. You mentioned the Euthyphro dilemma, and this is a really old dilemma in philosophy. It's the idea of
correct.
How can you really say that the gods are good? Are they good because they do good things, or do they do good things because those things are good? Like where do you really ground goodness, right? But to my understanding, the Euthyphro dilemma was originally not aimed at a monotheistic God, but polytheism. And
it was originally posited by Epicurus. Yeah.
Yeah, and,
Well,
and
yeah,
the, and the
I can-
target
I
of
already-
the argument was polytheism. Now, the reason why, so the horns of the dilemma make sense. I think I understand the dilemma from a polytheistic framework. I think from polytheism, and I'd be interested to hear how you might respond. I don't think there's a good answer for that dilemma, in my opinion there. But from a Christian perspective, God's very nature is the good. God is good, right? And therefore, he commands good things because he is good. So we have a God who is actually holy in theism, and that escapes the horns of the dilemma. The Euthyphro dilemma doesn't seem like it holds any water in the Christian worldview.
I'd say that's can kicking in a way that makes holiness arbitrary. But to address what you were
How
talking
so?
about with, well, then what's defining the holiness? What's defining the goodness there? Is it God making that holy, or is there something external to God making it holy? It kicks the can in a different direction. And that's the thing that I've noticed
it
when
would be-
Christians are dealing with Euthyphro dilemma is that they're usually kicking it, like putting the dilemma in something else rather than addressing the dilemma.
Yeah, I
So,
think that
as
the
far as-
nature of God responding to this, the nature of God being holy, and the fact, in the Christian worldview, the monotheistic God, right? He's eternal. He's self-existent. He is the grounding of all reality, right? And therefore, it makes sense to be able to ground goodness in his very nature. That is like a safe place to ground things, so to speak. There's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere left to kick the can, because he is the one eternal, self-existent thing.
At that point, that's when it becomes arbitrary, is because there's no reason for it. Therefore, if there is no reason, it's random. So goodness, in its definition, everything that is good, all the defining commands around goodness are random. To address real quick, I want to go back to
That's
as far
definitely
as
not
Euthyphro dilemmas.
the Christian view. Yeah. But please go on.
Correct. I understand that like Christianity doesn't go with that, but with the premises that you put forward, it winds up with that position. That's going to be my criticism. If you can respond to that, but first I want to go to what the Euthyphro dilemma's origin was in polytheism. That it was not initially an objection to polytheism, but it was a paradox as an observation of polytheism about piety, as whether or not one is pious because they do what the gods wants, or like. So I think Euthyphro originally objected to Socrates saying, or Socrates objected to Euthyphro, one or the other. Look it up. But it's about are people pious because the gods favor them, or do the gods favor people because they are pious? So and it doesn't tear down polytheism. It just asks questions about the motivations and notes a paradox in how things are structured.
Are you saying that's like an early form of the dilemma? Because that's not the form that I've been familiar with anyway.
That's
The
the original
goes
form
like
of the dilemma.
The original form is that Socrates had asked Euthyphro, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? That's from Euthyphro from the Plato's Dialogue.
Oh, is it pious?
But, yeah, right,
We're not referring to pious people, but pious acts.
No, is the
Okay,
pious loved by the gods?
Either way, it could. I think that it's meant to mean pious people, but you could interpret it either way. But in addressing it, either case, polytheism is fine. There's no threat to the God's sovereignty if goodness is rooted somewhere external to the gods. There is no threat
It's not their sovereignty
to polytheism.
that's being threatened, though.
Well, in
right?
Christianity, it is God's sovereignty that would be threatened. Because if goodness is
I don't
external to God, then there's something else that's commanding what is good that God is following, rather than God actually defining the goodness. And if God is defining the goodness, then it's purely up to his whim and it's arbitrary. And I've yet
To
to
me,
see a
it just
Christian actually
threatens
get out of
Christian
the dilemma.
theology,
You've said
in
that
a
you don't
sense.
think there's a good answer to it.
Yeah, but I'm just wanting to respond to what you said there. It doesn't so much threaten God's sovereignty as it, in my mind, as it threatens theology. It's just that's not what Christian theology teaches about who God is. Maybe we should talk about the difference between monotheism and polytheism in the nature of the types of beings that we're positing, because I feel like a lot of people don't
Sure.
understand that, and that's kind of
Yeah, we
might
should
help
define
in our
terms before we really
discussion
go
here.
forward. Yeah.
So could you help Ocean explain what's some of the differences between the nature of like a polytheistic deity, like say perhaps Thor or Odin or something, versus monotheism, like Yahweh?
So polytheists hold that the gods would, like, the necessary components of the gods would be a disembodied mind of great power. Essentially, I think there might be a couple of other components to it, but for now that works. As far as the Christian understanding, am I correct that you're holding to an omni-deity, that he's omnipotent, he's omniscient, he's omnibenevolent, like he's all powerful, all knowing, all good. I don't know. Omnipresence is something that Christians defer on. So
Omnipresent as well, yeah, but properly defined, yeah, like a real theological definition of those words, yes. Yeah.
Right. So polytheists would reject those, that those aren't the requirements for a deity in our interpretation. And that's where a lot of the meaningful differences are, and where polytheism and monotheism wind up having very different responses to typical arguments such as Euthyphro dilemma or problem of evil or divine hiddenness or any of these other arguments that wind up being put forward.
So I might point out another one, which would be like aseity or self-existence. So we believe God is self-existent. That's monotheism. That's the general view there. Whereas in polytheism, do you believe those gods are self-existent?
You could have one or several that have some sort of aseity, but that doesn't. Like, I might not argue that Thor has aseity, because Thor is, according to legends, begotten. With polytheism, though, having a deity that has aseity is not a contradiction to polytheism. Yeah, you can either have it or not. That's one that when you look at the fallout from it, if we then logically conclude that there must be a god with aseity, polytheism can function perfectly well. If we logically conclude,
do you have an example? I'm just curious.
Later that there's not.
Yeah. Is there like a particular god that's viewed as being self-existent?
There's several. It's a lot of the creator deities are seen that way. So chaos might be something that has aseity.
I was actually going to say chaos.
Idrisil might have aseity, and Stephen Dillon wrote a book called Case for Polytheism, his PhD in philosophy, that he puts forward. He posits a god named Aletheia that is the grounding of truth and morality. Does a lot of the same things as the Christian God does, but isn't omnipotent and isn't omnipresent, and a lot of the omnis. It's not those things, but it would be have aseity and be the grounding of morality. So I think that he recognizes that those things are necessary, but he has a polytheistic framework that works within that thing. That those are present in his manifestation of polytheism. But that's not necessarily a position that I take. I'm agnostic on that. I don't think that it matters as far as personal spirituality is concerned.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I was hoping that little moment would bring out for us is just that when we say, we're not just talking like, okay, Thor's a god, Yahweh's a god. We're just giving different credit to these different beings that are basically similar. They're so radically different that they're different kind of orders of beings. In English, we often capitalize G for the monotheistic kind of eternal creator God. It's just a colloquial thing we do, right? It's not like some rule of law, but lowercase g for like these other types of gods. So we have like the uncreated creator of all things, who is omnipotent, who is eternal, who is self-existent, who is the grounding for reality, who is all of those qualities. That's the monotheistic God. The polytheistic gods are they're varied. None of them have those qualities, certainly not those capacities, but not like
the omnis,
God
but
in the Bible does.
You're talking about, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a different class of being. It's like comparing, maybe a better parallel for the gods of of like mythology, Norse and different beliefs, like that would be like superhero type characters with maybe from some of the comics that have the weird characters with weird origin stories, like the Silver Surfer and stuff like that. I'm not trying to downplay them. I'm just trying to help people conceptualize the differences.
So I would hold that the gods are non-physical. So
Yeah, and that would immediately.
Yeah,
because with the gods of comic book characters, there's typically a physical manifestation, and usually, unless we're talking about somebody like Darkseid, the physical manifestation only really exists in characters like that. For others, it's like they are purely physical, so they're defined completely differently than a polytheistic deity would be.
So other than physicality, is it a good analogy?
One thing
I think it's a meaningful difference, though. Like you might be able to say that. I mean, there's omnipotent deities in the Marvel universe as well that are physical. So I mean, because they have to interact with other characters. I think there's like a Marvel deity called the One or something like that. That's largely based on Yahweh, except he has physicality.
I don't know most of the Marvel universe characters.
I'm guessing. I'm actually I'm asking that too, Suris, just to make sure that I'm like on point there, because I don't know.
I know about the One.
I went down a Google hole and I found him. The One, I think, or the whatever the there's a monotheistic deity of some kind in the Marvel universe, if I recall.
Yes, and then you've got
like
and then under him you've got things like the Watchers and stuff like that that have to take care of the universe. But that's that would be
the one above all.
That would be close. Yeah, one above all.
One above all.
That would be close. And then in DC, you've got like the Monitors that are going to be close to that as well. But that's really the only thing that you could probably find in Marvel between the. Well, yeah, even then, you'd probably only really find the One Above All or the Monitors are the closest thing you could find to that. But that's also not the discussion for today.
It's just point is that to compare my gods to comic book characters, we could definitely turn that around. There's a comic book character represents your guy too. Also,
fine, I didn't mean it as derogatory. I'm just going for clarity here.
To quote Dumbledore.
If somebody, I hate to. If we let someone defer to somebody else and having the last word on morality, and then we'll move on to human value. Unless you feel satisfied.
If I could bring this up just real quick, Suris, you mentioned morality, and we didn't, you didn't get to expound on that at all afterwards. But when you say, just to poke at your worldview, in a friendly way here,
sure.
That your view of morality is kind of non-moral realist. Let me give you like a hypothetical scenario, and I'm curious how you would analyze that. I've used this scenario before. A lot of people have. So let's say that you go back. Hitler always comes up with morality. It's an easy example. We can all agree he's a bad guy. He let's say he successfully takes over the world. He brainwashes everyone who disagrees with him or kills them. And now everybody on Earth who's still alive, they all believe that what he did was good and right, and that he should have exterminated those people and all those sorts of things. Now, in your framework, are all those people morally wrong with your understanding of morality? You're probably one of the dead ones, or you're brainwashed by now. But with the framework you have on morality, can you say that Hitler and all those people are just
with the framework
wrong?
that I have? So with the framework that I have on morality, most of that would still be considered wrong, because one of the things that I would typically appeal to with a moral argument would be the veil of ignorance. And in the veil of ignorance, what you typically do, for anybody who's watching who's not familiar with the veil, whenever you were to put any law into society, you put yourself into that society not knowing what class you will be born into. And that's how you write the law. So you can't put in, for instance, in your example, you wouldn't put in something that's entirely anti-Semitic, because there's always that chance that you would be born into the society as a Jew. You would not put in something that's anti-LGBTQ, because you could be born into the society, part of the LGBTQ community. The appeal to the veil of ignorance makes it to where when you find yourself in a situation like that, where there are class distinctions, or there are race distinctions, appealing to the veil of ignorance will show, especially in a case like that even in situations like that, it's wrong. And from the veil of ignorance, you can then get a consequentialist argument from that.
So what I'm proposing is a situation where either you're dead or you're now in agreement with Hitler. So what I'm saying is, now from the outside looking in, can you objectively say that you and everyone else is wrong now?
I just did.
So the veil of ignorance is not so much, I don't think, part of the solution, because you will have, you know, that's the brainwashing part of the hypothetical there now.
Well, the thing is that the veil of ignorance avoids that entirely. And I would say, I would hope at least, that it's okay for me to use an appeal to something that completely kicks the can if you're going to do the same in a previous argument. But the thing with
I don't understand
the veil of ignorance, that's okay. I'm sure the audience might. But the thing with the the thing with the veil of ignorance, the thing with the veil of ignorance is that it assumes that you could be the person who died, and it assumes that you also have an equal chance of being one of the brainwashed ones. You could be either one of these people. It's an appeal to both sides of that coin. So arguing that you are born on one side of the coin or the other is irrelevant to the topic, when the veil of ignorance already addresses both sides of that coin.
Okay, I was hoping to set up a situation where it would just deal with whether or not, you know, where objective morality versus subjective morality becomes very clear in the difference of them, but instead it's an ethical discussion about the veil of ignorance. But
can I interject something real quick to kind of get it back on track? Because this is the disconnect that I see all the time, and if you guys are going to have a fruitful discussion, this needs to be said. I mean, this needs to be brought out. There's a huge difference between metaethics and normative ethics, right? And when you're talking about objective morality, you're in the realm of metaethics. You're saying there are moral facts that exist. They are not dependent upon what anybody thinks. They exist, and if somebody says they're wrong, that person is just wrong about it, right? If you and I say, hey, let's play a game of chess, and we just sit down, and the rules are objective, we play by it, right? Those are objective rules. But then you're asking him about normative ethics, right? When you're saying, what are you going to do in a specific situation? Those are
I asked
cases,
about.
right?
I was not asking about normative ethics.
Well, but
that was the answer, but that wasn't the question.
Utilitarianism. He could say all those people are wrong, whatever. It has nothing to do with objective morality, though. Objective morality is that you have moral facts that are just not contingent upon human subjectivity. So he could say moral facts are subjective, but you know what? Hitler and the rest of them were completely wrong and appeal to some normative ethical theory, right? So there's a distinction to be made between normative ethics and metaethics, and I see a lot of overlap in these discussions.
I am trying to talk about metaethics, not normative. The answer was about normative. You're right. That's not my question, though. It's about, is it objectively actually wrong? But anyway, we won't kick a dead horse. I never have heard someone, be able to have a clear conversation with two different worldviews on that topic. So why would I expect us to do it? So
with three,
but we can. We got lots to talk about today, though.
This is probably the deepest hole we could have dug in the very beginning of the conversation.
It's okay. Morality.
It's great. We're going to start off with something simple and straightforward, like morality. Great.
Yeah, we're going to start off with a conversation that's been had for thousands of years.
For the next one,
I mean, honestly, that's what this whole thing is.
Human value.
If
we move to human value, we'd love to get your guys' opinions on human value from the three perspectives. So, Suris, if you want to start us off, I would love to hear your views as well as everybody else's.
Sure. I mean, my view is that as far as human value is concerned, I think that everybody has equal rights. Or everybody should have equal rights, rather. And I think that everybody should be valued equally. So, and this might get into a completely different discussion, but I think that a mother and her child have equal value, and that leads into a completely different discussion, but that's not one I'm having right now. I've actually had that discussion here on Nonsequitur Show. But I think that a soldier and a civilian have equal value. The only value that's established after that point is maybe what benefit they give to society. But past that, I still view everybody as having equal value. So what that basically means is that, no, I do not want to step on that pal's throat.
Gotcha. Thank you. And we'll kick it back to Mike. Mike, what about you?
The Christian worldview speaks in tremendously high terms of the value of human life. It says that mankind is made in the image of God. We're elevated extremely highly because of this. It talks about us human rights as being founded upon that fact of, like the very nature of humans made in God's image. And so humans have incredible value in the Christian worldview. And that, again, that like morality, that comes from God and the eternal, constant bedrock of reality, which is God. So that gives rise to our deep value, and that would be whether or not anyone else agrees. That's like an objective value thing. It's not just an opinion. That's the worldview the worldview view.
Gotcha. And Ocean, how about you?
So I guess I'm sort of in between these two. So for me, I believe that we do have equal value, and that a lot of what, like, the responsibility of defending that is on us. I would also say that there's a value to humanity that we have as far as our relationship with the gods are concerned. Many of our legends have a relationship with the gods as far as the origin of humanity. We are the animals on the earth that have religion, have relationship with the gods as well, like in our active spirituality. So as far as that, as whatever intrinsic value that you can get out of those factors, that's where you might derive it. But I'd probably end it there. I do think, though, that I want to stress that it is up to us to defend that value within each other, because without that check that we provide for ourselves, we can easily lose that meaning, or at least lose sight of it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks. So, any concerns you guys have in terms of other worldviews being able to account for equality among humans?
Sure.
Or even humans
I could
that
bring
are
up
more valuable. Go ahead.
I could bring up one if it's all right. So obviously, I think that everybody should have equal rights. That includes, marriage rights. That includes your rights to anything that's government funded. So one of the questions I would have for Mike is, could you perhaps articulate your view on LGBTQ people for us? Because that is usually one of the, I guess the word would be one of the sacred cows of this discussion that happens all the time. I figured that would be a decent lightning rod to start this discussion.
Sure. Well, my view on LGBTQ people would be that they're made in the image of God. They have the same value as I do, as anybody else does. I mean, they're not significantly different in nature than anybody else. Similarly, like the Christian view of racism would be that this is antithetical to the very concept of all being made in the image of God, all of one blood, the scripture says. So yeah, we're immensely valuable because of that. Now, because of that value and because of the purpose that God has given us, it means that we have accountability and we have a calling to live our lives in certain ways. And God does care about how we live our lives. And that includes the way that we're designed for male and female. So having value as a human doesn't make your behaviors all equally good, right? Like, you'd agree with that, right? Like, even though you may be valuable, it doesn't mean that what you do is approvable.
Oh, I would agree. For instance, as an example, I would not say that somebody who decides to go commit a murder, that is a valuable action, for instance. Unless, of course, there was a motivation behind it. That gets into another ethical discussion, not one that I'm having right now. Not that I would equate homosexuality to murder or anything that's classic. I know the classic go-to is appealing to something like pedophilia. That is usually one of the talking points on the other end. I'm not saying that's your talking point, but I am saying it's one that I've heard constantly.
It's not, yeah. No,
Okay.
I wouldn't equate homosexuality to murder or pedophilia. There's the issue. Let's talk about marriage for a second. Let me put it this way: the Christian view is not about homosexuality. The Christian view is about men and women and their design. That's the Christian view, right? So the Christian view is this: that God made man and
that inherently entails that comes into it, though, doesn't it?
Yeah,
sorry,
but
VMix has this thing where, like, there's a bit of lag between the two people, so we end up talking over each other. I'm going to let you go.
So the Christian view is that God made man and made woman and designed them for each other, which actually fits even an evolutionary view. If you didn't think we were made in God's image, you'd at least say that they fit together, and there's a function that man and woman have that does not go from man to man or woman to woman or anything else. So the Christian view is about the sanctity and goodness of the man-woman relationship, the husband-wife relationship, it's not about the wickedness of something else, right? Those other things are wrong because they violate this and they go against this.
Okay.
So
you mentioned that.
So in that sense, I would say.
Sorry.
After you.
I was saying that you mentioned that it fits into an evolutionary model. So you know that the evolutionary model only cares about one thing, and that is procreation, so that the whole of the community continues forward. However, when it comes to homosexuality, there's more than sex that comes into that conversation. There's also the human relationships. There's also companionship. There's a lot more that goes into that, just as I'm sure you would take umbrage if I said that the only thing that's viable from the male and female relationship is the sex that comes out of it, because there's more to it than that. The sanctity of marriage has to do with more to it than that in the Christian worldview, as far as I remember. I spent 23 years as a Christian, just for that sake. So to argue that the design aspect factors into the conversation, it's not incorrect, but it is not the only aspect. There's other aspects there. So my question to you would be then, if we take ability to procreate as only one option in there, what difference is there between a homosexual couple who can't procreate? Let's just say that they don't go for any of the extra methods of procreation that are available to them. But there's a couple who are man and woman. They get together. They decide that they don't want to have children, or they are infertile. What is the difference between these two relationships?
Well, there's still differences, but I think that what we're doing is we're making a rule
how?
out of.
What is the difference between these two?
Hold on.
I'm asking you to answer instead of diverting. I didn't answer. I didn't ask another. I asked how for the specific one you brought up.
There's differences in parenting. There's differences in the way that a man and woman relate to one another versus a way that a man and man relate to one another, or a way that a woman and a woman relate to one another. And you can measure these differences. You can test these things and see them. There's differences in the way that they're able to be physically intimate together. There are differences. These are just facts of life. Like now you may call me a bigot, or perhaps tweet that I'm a homophobe.
Oh, I'm not.
As you did earlier or yesterday.
Yeah, because I did read I did listen to your thing.
Yeah. But these are actual facts from reality. We have to face these facts. And
so, are you aware of where those facts came from? Are you aware of where those facts came from?
I'll answer that in a second. But if I were purely an evolutionist, my perspective would be that homosexuality is unproductive toward the goal of producing offspring, and that it seems as though it's actually harmful in other physical ways. So it's not the ideal. Now, I wouldn't think you'd have if I was an atheist, I wouldn't think you had any moral obligation to not do it, but I wouldn't think it was helpful. I wouldn't think it was pragmatically useful. Now, on the flip side, from the Christian worldview, we're made in the image of God. That elevates us, and that elevates the moral consequence of the decisions we make. So all of a sudden, it really matters what you do with your life. So anyway, go ahead. You had a specific question you wanted me to answer.
And then we've got to go to Ocean after Suris, just so Ocean can get a word in after Suris.
So polytheism has opinions on this, but yeah, go for it.
So the question that I would ask is, you said that there are facts, but you did not state any of those facts. I would like, are you referring to the facts that you talked about in your video that I was referencing when I did that tweet? Because there are statistics that you listed in there.
If you go to my website, BibleThinker.org, and you look where the series I did is on the topic of homosexuality, like 3 years ago, I did a series on it. I actually have my notes available for download. In my notes are the references and the citations to the studies and the sources that I use for all that data.
Okay, and I know that the references
like
there were
48 pages of content.
I know. I've gone through because I've actually had a video on this topic before that used the same sources. So
no, you don't even know my sources right now, Suris. Hold on, just a second. You don't even know my sources, but the truth is, I'm not here to present a case on this topic right now. It's really cumbersome for me to try to go dig that information up in the middle of our current conversation. But I'm telling you, you can have my notes. All my sources are right there. And if I'm wrong on something, I'm more than happy to change it and recant it. I mean, this is a hot issue. People get really angry about it. I'm not one of those people. right? I do care about truth, and I care
I'm-
about people, and I do think God has designed us for His purposes, and we should acknowledge that.
Okay, I'm glad that you do care about truth, and there's a reason that I bring this up, because this is an issue of human equality, which is the topic that we're on. So one of the authors that presented one of the studies that you presented in your presentation, I said present way too many times, was Mark Regnerus, and he actually ended up getting completely discredited for the study that you used, because that study was paid for by another company. I think they paid him like $700,000, or 70 or 700, but a ludicrous amount, specifically to give the results that he gave and to give the reasons for those results.
So he was discredited because of who paid him?
He wasn't discredited just because who paid him. The people who paid him for a reason. One of the reasons was in order to get a particular response out of him with that study. And then after analyzing the study again, there was an analysis of this that was done on, where's the thing here? I have it here.
I'll just say this, Suris, please send that over to me, and I'd love to check it out. Yeah. But I won't be able to respond thoughtfully to it.
That's fair. But it's from the SPLC.
Southern Poverty Law Center, right? That's what you're referencing?
Yeah, the Southern Poverty Law Center did the analysis on that showed that, for instance, your comments that you said about their higher cancer rates had nothing to do with them being homosexual. That was entirely debunked.
That's not even part of the Regnerus study.
This is the guy.
I mean, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I don't know how. If let's say theoretically we show that Mike's video was wrong in every respect, does it follow that Christianity can't give a foundation for equality among humans? I don't think so. If you connect the dots for me,
it doesn't necessarily.
Okay, it doesn't at all, right? Tell me right now. Otherwise, we're off topic and we got to get back on.
I think like you're
kind of zoning in on
it. Kind of. Okay. It still has to do with the conversation. Hold on. It does have to do with the conversation, because if we're going to talk about equal rights, are LGBTQ people human, and do they have rights that need to be discussed? If that is the case, then this has everything to do with the conversation.
We can talk about rights, but we were originally talking about intrinsic value or extrinsic value. The question was value. So if you want to talk about state rights, like that's okay, but it's a different issue, and you know it is. So we're going to go back to the original topic. So we'll let.
Can I make a comment?
And I hate to be. Yeah, let's have Ocean weigh in. I hate to be so stern, but the fact that it zoned in at a particular video of somebody here, I just want to return. So go ahead, Ocean.
Yeah, damn, what a good point, Suris.
I want to piggyback a little bit off of it and make the point that within Christianity you find things like, if you find two men laying together, then you should kill them, for it is an abomination. This is a command. It may be in the Old Testament, it may be exempt in these times or something like that. But this was at a point a law handed down from God, according to most Christians anyway. And that, for me, like, if it's just wrong and it is something to be fixed or something like that, there isn't any discussion about solving the issue. There is, this behavior exists, eliminate it by death. And that's something that is, it's not, you have to view somebody as at least on a level less than human in order to have, because of certain behaviors, in order to have that kind of approach in order to solving the problem. With that, though, as far as like how this relates to polytheism, our legends have manifest homosexuality. There's also legends that manifest, to some arguments, trans identity. There isn't a very good argument within polytheism to condemn these things. In fact, polytheist lore across multiple pantheons suppose that this is just regular human interaction and even seen as imitation of the gods, perhaps. So what reason do we have to condemn it? But with Christianity, there's obvious reason to condemn it. It is in the scriptures that this is abhorrent, this is abomination, and in order to fix our societies, we must deal with this through the death penalty, and that's just absolutely abhorrent to me. Like, and as far as checks and morality,
there's some truth in what you're saying, but you're not representing the biblical perspective accurately.
Well, I mean, then what's the distinction between the biblical perspective and what I'm saying? At least as far as the Old Testament is concerned, it seems that
no, it's not just the Old Testament. Yeah, the phrase Old Testament, it's
Deuteronomy,
true. That's
all
where the
Levitical, all
passages
Levitical.
are. That's what portion of the scripture the passages are in. But we're talking about laws that were given to Israel, not to all people. Israel was never told to spread these laws to all people. I do think there's a moral component that's going on there. There was a death penalty given for several things. And then the scripture teaches us, if you have a Christian worldview, that the law is meant to show us how bad sin is. And there's things that have been done by many of us that would mean the death penalty, whatever is required of us, to show us that we need forgiveness for our sins before God. I mean, but this was not a law that was meant to say all nations, here's all of the laws that you should all have. That's not the context of the Old Testament. And we can do a whole Bible study on that. But if you could just take my word for it, that would be nice, at least for now. Let me represent the Christian worldview.
I can grant you that. I can grant you that and say, hey, these laws are just for the chosen people of God. However, it remains that a perfect God, a perfect moral deity, handed down a set of laws to a particular group of people set to preserve his word, that we should be dealing with this problem through the death penalty. And
not we, they. There is a big difference between we and they, isn't there?
Still perfect. Sure. It means that you have a subgroup of people that were communicated to by a perfect God rather than trying to say apply it to everybody. You still have the command from a perfect moral deity that this must happen within a group of people. Now, the question
so let me give you like two different ways of interpreting that. Well, one way to interpret it is to say that's horrific, that God must really be evil. Another way to interpret it is that act is evil, it must actually be morally wrong.
So it's evil for two people to love one another and show that in intimacy.
It is not about love. I mean, say that to like a dad and his daughter. Is it evil for him to just love her and show her in intimacy?
I thought we weren't going to bring up something equivocating to something.
I'm not
pedophilia.
Okay, don't get me wrong. I'm not paralleling the two acts as though they're the same thing.
That's what you just did, though.
But if your operating principle is that if two people love each other, then they should be able to do intimate things, then what's wrong with adultery? Or what's wrong with bestiality? I mean, if an animal has that kind of affection for their master.
The problem with bestiality is an issue of consent.
Let me pause you for 1 second. I'm not paralleling them. I'm asking.
If you are not paralleling them, then why are you bringing up in a parallel argument? If you're not paralleling them, then why are you bringing them up in a parallel argument?
It's okay. Listen, you have to.
You're trying to juxtapose the. You're trying to juxtapose the two. I'm trying to let you have your view, but I'm also trying to suss it out. If you're going to juxtapose the two things, these two things are now going to be paralleled. You now have a parallel argument. So you can't say you're not paralleling the two things. You
can apply a principle into situations that are not parallel if the principle is equally applying into those different situations. That's all I'm doing. Your principle is two people love each other. The situation is two people love each other.
You could ignore some of the nuance in the situation, but some of the nuance in the situation comes down to one of the issues is consent. An animal or a child, both of these cannot give consent, and consent becomes muddy when we're talking. An animal doesn't actually have the ability to give vocal consent, and that's one of the criteria that we have when we're talking about this type of thing. Also, when we're talking about an issue of either incest or we're talking about an issue of pedophilia, there's a consent problem there as well because of two things. One, lack of consent in the problem of the child, and with the problem of incest, inability to determine the power dynamic. When you're dealing with issues like this, you do have to bring up nuances here, and those nuances do change these things from your standard conversation about this, which is just, oh, these things love each other, that should be all that's required. That's not necessarily something that can be determined when we're dealing with issues of consent and power dynamics.
All right. Like I said, I got one last series. I deal with exactly those arguments in that series. I welcome you guys to look at it, but I also know that we're supposed to talk about other topics as well today. So yeah. I know that both Ocean and Suris, you have responses. I'm sorry to cut you off, but just to get to the last one. So eternal destination, which worldviews account for it in a way in which we have a destination beyond Earth, which ones don't, or is it even important whether or not they do or don't? So for example, some Christians might say that we have more meaning within afterlife, and some atheists, of course, I think everybody knows that most atheists would say, no, it's not any more meaningful because you have an afterlife. So excited to hear your guys' views.
So you mean afterlife and not like Mars beyond Earth, right?
That's a good
Just leads
point.
down
I
to-
appreciate
okay,
you saying that. So we'll have to hear if you want to start us, Ocean. That way you can add more context or nuance.
At some point, the sun's going to blow up and we have to go somewhere. No,
So, death of the universe,
Or we
guys.
just go-
We're all along for the ride.
yeah. So as far as I might be a good person to go last on this topic, rather because I'm going to have the more complicated position. But I believe that from the polytheist perspective, I'm personally agnostic on the afterlife, but I'm happy to represent the position of most polytheists that there would be multiple afterlives, that in our praxis with the deities that we make investment with the gods, and that there are afterlives that would be prepared by those gods for us. This would mean that Christians go to heaven, that anybody that follows Odin in specific ways that are mentioned in the text would wind up with Valhalla. General catch-alls would wind up in the Helheim, which is a kind of, it's an afterlife that's pleasant. It's not like the Christian hell, even despite the name similarity. It's more of it's described as green fields, and where the goddess of death is a matron of the dead that takes care of the dead. There's other beliefs about them being prepared to reunite in the afterlife, or being reunited with each other in the afterlife, and then preparing to go back into life again. So reincarnation beliefs would be common. As far as like verifying these beliefs, I don't think that there's necessarily a way to do it, but we don't have the same kind of like judgment-based afterlives like Christians do, or and we're not necessarily adherents to there being no afterlife like many atheists are. Although I do know of atheists that believe in an afterlife. I don't think that Suris is one of those.
No.
But
I would like one. That'd be neat.
Yeah, and that's more or less my perspective on it. It's like, well, I'm going to live my life within my spirituality. I'm going to live it as dedicated as I can. If there happens to be an afterlife, then awesome, bonus points. If not, then I won't be around to not be satisfied.
We'll go back to Mike. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I think that the Christian worldview is sometimes oversimplified when it comes to the afterlife, but there is an afterlife, and the human lives on beyond the body. You're not just your body. There's more to you than just your physical body, and so you have a soul, and you are eternal. And so the human life lives on beyond that, and we either are judged according to our lives based upon a perfect justice system, according to a balanced judgment, as Scripture says, like according to what we actually knew, what we were capable of, like real accountability, not like a cookie cutter thing, accountability that's specific for you. And then we are otherwise, if we receive forgiveness through Jesus Christ, we're washed of our sins and we receive God. Now, the Bible seems to imply that man has their own choice that they're making in this, more than imply. I mean, the Bible teaches that we have a choice that we're making in this. We're deciding whether or not we would receive God or reject God through the decisions we make through our lives. And so there ends up being a measured judgment. Hell is not the same experience for everybody. It's a measured judgment depending on the individual. And then heaven is not only with God immaterially, or non-corporeally for a time, but then new heaven and new earth that Revelation talks about as well. The picture, though, I'll just say this: the picture that the Bible presents is that all this stuff that's happening now is leading towards something, and it's accomplishing something, and it's the ultimate destination for the recreation of all these things, that we would really enter into the fullness of what God has planned. So we see this as being the hardship before what is glorious.
Thanks, Mike. And
You said
Suris,
different kinds
how about
of
you, bud?
punishments. Oh, okay, never mind. Go for it.
That's okay. Mine's really short and simple. I think we should live life to the fullest here and now, only because I don't really have a just kind of like with Ocean, I'm agnostic on the principle of an afterlife. If there is one, neat. If there's one religion that is true, and I happen to find myself in whatever afterlife that religion has, also neat. If not, it's not going to be any skin off my back. I'm not going to be too terribly worried about it. I'll actually lack the capacity to worry about it, all things considered. But past that, my view is just to make everything in this world as good as possible while we are here. because even if there is an afterlife, this particular instance of this life is the only one we have. So even if, for instance, me and Mike and me and Ocean find ourselves in an afterlife that none of us expected, we can at least say, I would hope we can say that we left this life a little better than we came into it.
I think that that any afterlife would fit into my view of it. I mean, unless there's no gods.
Anyone,
you know,
any afterlife,
right? It's fine. But I mean, I don't know if it would. I mean, if it's possible that it might not be one that is described by any of our legends or anything like that. But who knows? I'm not really prepared to make any like bones about it either way.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing from the Christian worldview is that we have like this verification about the statements of the afterlife in the resurrection of Christ. And I did, the one time I was on the Nonsequitur show, it was a debate on the evidence for the resurrection, which I presented a minimal case, not even all the evidence, not that you could present all that in one debate. But that would be, the perspective is that the resurrection of Christ validates all these claims about the future and about eternal destinies and about life beyond the grave, and that Jesus is ultimately the one who can bring us to God. Yeah, so that's a big difference, I think, between not only, say, the atheist perspective. There, generally speaking, I think a consistent atheist perspective is there is no afterlife. Ocean's perspective is that he's not sure, whereas a Christian perspective would be there is. This is what it is, and here's the validation of it.
I think both me and Suris are saying we're not sure, but I'm willing to defend the position that there's several, even heaven. The Christian heaven, I think, would be the afterlife that your God would have prepared for your people, or your God would have prepared for His people, I guess, the Christians. That being said, there's questions about the whole justice thing. That I don't necessarily understand. When you were talking about different kinds of punishments in hell, are you like a Dante's Inferno guy? There's like different levels of hell with different.
I haven't even read Dante's Inferno, so
it's like
it
9
seemed
levels
weird to
of
me,
hell.
and I never gave it any attention.
It's similar to what you described.
The Divine Comedy is a good piece of literature.
You should probably give it a read.
No, please don't view me through Dante and his Inferno.
Yeah, we're not going to view you through the lens of the Divine Comedy. We know that the Divine Comedy is just a piece of literature. It's not your.
Well,
it's not your worldview.
It includes purgatory, so I doubt that it's like your position is exactly like Dante. But what he does do is he has like different kinds of punishments for different people. Like there's a level for the virtuous pagans that is like a beautiful field, and then you get further down. There's like a level for people that have no allegiance, and they're all running through mud chasing a bannerless flag. I could describe the rest of them, but it winds up going down to the betrayers.
Let me answer what I...
Cassius and Judas and Satan, and they're all stuck in ice. The cold heart of hell. It's a wonderful piece of literature. You should definitely check it out.
Sounds great.
It was similar to what you described.
So honestly, because here's what I'm doing with my whole Christian worldview and my understandings of God and of Christ is I'm kind of one by one reassessing everything I believe. I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm doing it in my online ministry as well. It's usually not until I reassess a thing and then I will teach it. So when I did my series, for instance, I don't want to get into the debate on it, but on the topic of homosexuality, I first started by looking at those who are reinterpreting the scriptures to say, we think that we should change the view Christians have on this. And I listened to their arguments, and I tried to look as much as I could at both sides of the issues. And so I've done this as well. What I haven't done this with is the topic of hell. I have not fully vetted this issue. And so I have some anchor points, which are the things I share with you. But there's some questions I have that I want to answer. And hopefully this year sometime, I'll spend the time on it, do the theology of it, and then come out with the more thorough teaching on the topic. But I'd stand by what I shared.
Is it possible, I guess, that you're a Pelagian, that somebody can live a perfect life? It's possible that somebody can go to heaven by living a perfect life without salvation from Christ, or by living a life at least worthy of going to heaven without salvation from Christ.
I guess I'm not a Pelagian, but I think I would answer it that it's you can talk about it hypothetically and you can make sense of it, so it's like logically possible. But I think if I'm using the terms right, I think it's not feasible.
That's Pelagius' position. That's exactly Pelagianism.
Not as I understand it. So logically possible, like you can conceive of it. It's logically possible, but there's things that are logically possible that aren't going to happen in the real world under any, current circumstances. And that's, I do believe in the fall. Mankind has fallen, and that the only way anyone's ever going to be saved is going to be by God's grace, not by their perfect acts.
Okay, so as far as like how it's going to manifest, they need to be saved by God's grace. So they need salvation to Christ. Do they have to accept it, or do they like knowingly accept it, or?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I keep clearing my throat.
I'm asking if I'm going to hell. I'm trying to find out.
I have a teaching that I think you may have heard at Ocean a while ago on the topic of what about those who've never heard the gospel. It was a while back, but I have a teaching on that where I go through that, and I go through it biblically. So we talk about Abraham, we talk about Job, we talk about Naaman the Syrian, these people who did not have the full knowledge of Christ, nor did they reject it. They weren't exposed to it, but yet they were saved. And they had faith in what God had revealed to them. But I don't think that extends to people who are active members in polytheistic traditions, because I think that involves a rejection of God based on Romans 1. So there is and you yourself have said that you reject the Bible, you reject the God of the Bible, right?
Yeah, I do.
Before you answer,
before you
answer, Ocean,
what's up?
don't give it away yet, because we're going to leave them on a cliffhanger. We're switching over to modern day debate. So to hear Ocean's answer,
There's the turnover.
follow us
Yay!
over
Can't
to modern
wait.
day
And
debate.
again, reminder, if you're new to Nonsequitur, sub. They've got Christians like Mike on often. This is Mike's second or third time, and I've been on here. I've enjoyed it, and so totally remind you, if you're new, please do sub. Hit that thumbs up button.
These are the sanest
And Ocean
conversations
gets
that we have.
excited.
So I warn you, if you do sub, that this is like these are our best right here. Now, we do flat Earth, and I just don't recommend you subbing. I just can't. I can't.
But Ocean gets people excited. Why would they not want to sub? Up for the Ocean excitement. Come on, people. Yay.
I'm kidding.
There's ocean
But yes,
excitement.
I'm working for you. I'm working for you. here,
And-
dude. Wow.
And everybody from our that's regulars in our stream, please make sure that you click that link. We're going over to Modern Day Debate, a fantastic channel as well, and make sure that you sub to him. So we're going to be continuing from the. I can't even talk tonight. We're going to jump back with the with Ocean's response following this brief break, and we'll pick back up in just a few minutes over at Modern Day Debate.
Non sequitur. Your facts are uncoordinated.